Well, it's been almost 2 years since I made part 1 of this video where I showed how to trim 4/10 of an inch off 223 brass to get started making 300 blackout brass. Now I'm going to finish up showing how to finish all the steps needed. I've trimmed and reformed 500 pieces of brass here. I've got about 350 left, so that's about 4 hours of work. There's some job security for me. But I've trimmed it to a rough length and then resized it in a forming die so it looks sort of like this. You know, so it's a 223 piece of brass, but then it's been trimmed back and then run through a forming die so that it's just the regular resizing die that you'd get in a set of dies. That puts a really small shoulder in here and a 308 neck on it. So it's trimmed to the rough length. It's a little long coming off the milling machine, so now I'm going to finish trimming it and then chamfer the inside of the case neck, and then I'll deburr the outside of the case neck, and then I'll process the primer pocket, and then I'll go inside here and uniform this flash hole. You can probably see through there. Yeah. So I'll uniform the size of that flash hole and then also deburr the inside of the flash hole inside the case and put a bevel in there. So we'll go through the tools all in sequence here. This is an RCBS case prep center. It wasn't made for trimming brass, but it does a pretty good job. I've put a Lee cutter on here to trim the brass and then installed into the cutter. This is just high-speed steel, 4 cutters, rotates around. Inside there's threaded part there, and then I've threaded in this trim gauge. It's trims to the proper length, and the way that works is the pin here sticks up through the flash hole in the brass, so the brass goes down, the neck goes onto the cutters, and then that pin sticks up through that flash hole, and the pin bottoms out on this lock stud. The lock stud is this part. Just got a flat part, and that bottoms out right there, and that sets the overall length of the cartridge case. So when you buy this, you'll buy the cutter and the lock stud together. That's one Lee part number, and that's not caliber specific. And then you'll get the length, the trim length gauge, and then the shell holder, and those are caliber specific, so those are sold as another Lee part number. So then you just thread the shell holder onto the lock stud, and that holds the piece of brass by the rim. And you just tighten the shell holder down onto the lock stud, and that secures the brass nice and tight, so you can put that on there. It's knurled, both of these parts are knurled so you can hold it. But I find it's easier to use a magnetic screwdriver. This has a 1/4 inch hex bit on the top that just goes right into a magnetic screwdriver. That makes it very easy to hold very securely. So that's station 1, the trimmer, and I turned this little adapter for the Lee case cutter trimmer on my lathe and put an 832 screw in there. All 5 stations of the RCBS Case Prep Center have female 832, which is a standard for a lot of these case prep tools. Same as brushes when you're cleaning a gun, a lot of those are 832 threads. So moving on to station 2, I made another little adapter to hold this chamfering tool. That chamfers the inside of the case neck, so the case drops down on top of there and it puts a little bevel, if you will, a little chamfer on the inside of that case neck, and that helps the bullet go into the case neck more easily. This is a VLD chamfering tool. It's a very low drag. That's a reference to the type of bullets. VLD bullets are like rifle bullets with sort of a tapered base, but it helps this more acute angle, more gradual angle, helps seat pretty much all bullets, so I really like it for seating just about everything. Then moving on to station 3, there's an RCBS deburring tool. So the brass goes down inside that and it just spins and deburrs the outside. You're not looking for a bevel there, you're just looking to knock off any rough edges there. So that, I think, is the only tool on here that is standard on the RCBS Case Prep Center. And it's kind of slow, it's only got 2 cutters. I'd like to replace that with something a little faster, or maybe make another adapter and hold one of the 3 or 4 cutting surface tools, what I'd really like to do is replace this Lee cutter with a cutting tool that used the same trim length gauge, but also incorporated chamfering and deburring. Maybe someday I'll get around to making one tool and get rid of these two operations altogether and do them all three at once over in the cutter. And then over in Station 4, I've got a primer pocket tool. This does three different things. There's a flat top on there that's a cutter, so the brass comes out of the case lock stud, and now we'll be going down primer pocket first onto that. So that flat bottom, or the flat top of this, bottoms out and does the bottom of the primer pocket. And there's a flat wall cutter, flat cutter on the sides that does the flat walls on the inside of the primer pockets. And then there's a bevel on the bottom here that then puts a tapered entrance to the primer pocket, which makes it real easy to seat primers. That's one of the more obstinate parts of reloading on a progressive press, is seating the primers in there. They'll a lot of times not quite line up, don't want to go in well. So this tool will help make progressive reloading a lot more reliable and make priming a whole lot easier. Then the fifth tool is a Lyman flash hole uniformer. It's basically a little short drill bit on the top, and then underneath that is a bevel cutter. And the way this works is the brass goes neck down onto the cutter. It bottoms out onto this angled sleeve. There's a set screw in there. You can adjust it up and down to get the amount of cut you want in here. But it's real important that all the brass coming into this be trimmed to the same length. So you want to trim accurately over before you get to this, because the trim length determines the depth of the cut from the beveled cutter. So if you have random lengths going into it, you'll get random depths of the bevel. The whole point of this tool is to make the flash holes uniform. So it's important that the trim length is the same going into all of them. So the inside of the flash hole will have a nice beveled D-bird finish in there, and the hole itself will be of a uniform diameter. And both of these things will make more reliable, more uniform powder ignition when the primer is struck and lights off the powder, having the dimensions of that hole and the entrance into the chamber, into the case, be uniform. That'll improve accuracy if you're going for good accuracy. This is kind of an optional step if you're just making blasting ammo, then I go ahead and do it anyway. So let's get started and do one of these very quickly. I've put the lock stud and shell holder into my little magnetic bit here using it's just a 1/4 inch hex drive. Just goes right in there. So set it in and torque it down real nice and tight, because we're going to be putting a lot of torque over here cutting. So don't want it spinning out. Now you can hear it start cutting right now. And there's the sound of it cutting. And that's the sound of it not cutting. So it's bottomed out and the trimming is done. I'm taking off about 5/1000 of an inch. Then I go over to the chamfering tool, and that put a bevel on the inside. Then I go over to the deburring tool. It takes a little longer there, even though I'm not taking off much material, but that took the burrs off the outside. At that point, I can unlock the shell holder and then process the primer pocket. See the brass coming off there, and then very gently push down onto the flash hole uniformer. If you push down too hard at first, it'll grab, like a drill bit grabbing and pull, and then the brass can get stuck on there and spin with the cutter, and you might have to put this back on to get enough torque to get it to finish the cut. So when pushing down, just start very gradually, let it cut at its own speed. So that one's now finished, nice and uniform and ready to go. I'll do one more quickly. So into the shell holder, tighten it down. Trim the length. Chamfer. Deburr. Remove it from the shell holder. Process the primer pocket. And then uniform the flash hole. So About 350 more of those to go and I'll be done. Hope you found that interesting and hope it helps your reloading.